Started. Yeah, that way we can give you time to. Here we go. And yeah, let's get. Okay, so a few announcements for the seminar. We do not obviously have one next week. That's Thanksgiving. The week after that is then the faculty meeting, and then the week after that we do have a seminar, Doc Edge from Computational and Comp Bio from the main campus. UPC will be coming, and that'll be the last for this semester. I will be sending out an email. This is to people in the room, online, to get volunteers for next semester too. So, but maybe we'll have to make a concerted effort to sort of have crosstalk with Cedars here for next semester too. So today we have a very special guest, Jason Moore, who many of us have known for, well, 20 years, I think, is when we met in San Antonio way back at an iGuess meeting. And he is now in LA for the past year, starting a new, he's the chair of a new department, computational biomedicine at Cedars-Sinai. And he was telling me earlier that he's already grown it with 10 faculty and other staff around that. And so it's growing quickly. So it's here today to talk about accessible artificial intelligence in data science. So thank you, Jason. All right.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here and see so many old friends, familiar faces. And, you know, I haven't been going to iGuess for many years, so I don't get to see all my statistical genetics colleagues very often. So it's a pleasure to be here. Great to be in LA. I'm so excited to, you know, build connections with all of you. And if there's any way we can collaborate, work together, please reach out to me anytime. I really want to take advantage of the brain trust that's here in LA. And I was just recently got my adjunct appointment in biostats at UCLA, and I'm building bridges with them as well. And Cedars has just been an amazing place to work, and have been able to get a lot done very quickly. So what I want to do today is tell you about our work in AI, and I think it'll be a little different than what you're used to. You're probably used to hearing about deep learning and those kinds of things. So I think you'll find this refreshingly different, hopefully. So let me just start, as those of you that know my genetics work know that I really approach human health as a complex adaptive system, and think about the relationship between genotype and phenotype as really being driven by interactions in time and space. And that's what this figure is meant to represent, is that here at the bottom, we have a number of agents, genes, environmental factors, other things, and it's really how those factors organize themselves into systems and subsystems driven by interactions that determines health outcomes, the kinds of health outcomes that we're all interested in. And all this really means that if we really want to understand the relationship between biomarkers and human health, we have to take into account those interactions to really fully understand those relationships. And then you layer into that big data, which we all deal with now, you have a very complex problem. Lots of data, lots of noisy data, a very complex genotype to phenotype mapping relationship. And so I would argue that we really need AI to help us with these problems. And specifically, we need AI to be aware of the biology. And this is a common theme in my research, is that AI needs to know the things that we know about genes, about pathways, about disease mechanisms to be effective. And I'm not a big believer in throwing a massive data set at an AI algorithm. I think the AI needs to be smart about it. And I know this department, all of you have a deep history in using biological knowledge to guide your genetic association tests, certainly thinking about the work of David and Duncan and others. So just a little bit of history of AI for those of you that don't work in this area. Of course, it's the idea, can we get computers to solve problems and reason like we as humans do? And Alan Turing is one of the founding figures in the AI and computer science space. And he asked this fundamental question, can machines think? And more importantly, how would you know if a machine could think? And that became what we've affectionately called the Turing test for decades now. And the basic idea is, let's imagine you got out of bed this morning, you logged into your computer, your best friend was there, you had a conversation over social media, And then you saw your friend later that day and said, oh, that was a great discussion we had. And your friend said, oh, you weren't talking to me, you were talking to my computer. I was in bed sleeping. At that point, when you can't tell the difference between whether you're interacting with a computer or a real person, the computer is said to pass the Turing test. And the exciting thing is that we're now in this window of time where there are computers that are passing the Turing test. And this is one of the first ones that claim to pass the Turing test. This is a chatbot online. I think it's still active. I think you can still find Eugene Gooseman online and interact with it. And this is a supposed to be a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy online that you're chatting with. And somebody put it to the test and put 30 human users in front of it and asked the question, are you talking to a real person or are you talking to a computer? And 10 out of the 30 thought they were talking to a real person. And so they claimed that this was an example of a computer passing the Turing test. Now, this claim was premature and very controversial. Yeah.
How many do you have to pull to pass the Turing test?
I knew you spoken like a true statistician. How much evidence is there? But there was a lot of criticism, not just from statisticians about this particular result, because people interacting with the system knew that it was a 13-year-old and that it was, coincidentally a Ukrainian boy. Because if you know it's a child, you're going to give it the benefit of the doubt. And if you know it's a non-native English speaker, you're going to give it the benefit of the doubt, right? So this was not a very impressive passing of the Turing test, but it was one of the first that claimed to. A more legitimate claim is from Google, and this slide represents Google Assistant, which is a Google AI that can hold conversations with you very convincingly. And if you Google Assistant, and there's a YouTube video of Google Assistant in action, actually making a phone call to schedule a haircut appointment. So the computer calls up a business, talks to a receptionist, has a back and forth, schedules the haircut appointment. The receptionist hangs up and has no idea that she's talking to a computer. And so I think this is really very impressive, and is starting to get into this area of passing the Turing test. So we're in that space now where this is happening, and we'll talk about another example here in a few minutes. So just a little bit of history. There are a couple types of AI that AI researchers work with. There's top-down and bottom-up. Top-down is the idea of building an artificial brain that mimics the human brain, right? This is an engineering problem, really, and is difficult because we don't understand how the human brain works, right? So how are we going to engineer an artificial brain? But if you remember Data from Star Trek, Data had what Isaac Asimov, the great science fiction writer, called a positronic brain, an actual artificial brain that could, function at a human-like level. What most of us do is bottom-up AI, and I'm sure there's a lot of this going on here in this department, which is just built, simple mathematical functions that are pieced together to do something complex, like a neural network, right? It's just a bunch of small functions that you piece together to do something complex. That's what most of us do. And just as a point of trivia, the phrase AI was really solidified to describe the field at a workshop at Dartmouth College in 1956. Many of the leaders in the field, people like Marvin Minsky and others, came together that summer for a week or two up in Hanover, New Hampshire, and said, look, we need a phrase that captures what we do. And there were all kinds of other words for it, like cybernetics, that were being used, and that just created a lot of confusion. And so they came up with this phrase, artificial intelligence, and it stuck, and that's what we still call the field today. Now, AI's had a very interesting history, and a very interesting history in medicine. And if you think about the early days of, so AI prior to the invention of computers was really science fiction, right? It was imagined but not realized until computers were developed. And the first computers were developed during World War II to crack some of the encrypted messages, and then the first really computers that you could use came out in the 1950s and 60s, and the first home computers came out in the 1970s. And 1977 was a big year. That was the year the trifecta of home computers became available, where you could walk into a store and buy a computer and take it home and program it and use it. The Apple II, the Commodore PET and the Radio Shack TRS-80 all came out in 1977. That was also the year of Star Wars, Saturday Night Fever, and also the internet was, I think, convincingly demonstrated for the first time in 1977. That was also the year of Sanger sequencing. The Sanger's great DNA sequencing paper was published in Science in 1977. So I always look at 77. That was like a big year. I was 9 years old in 1977. And so, you know, when computers came on the scene, there was a lot of excitement about AI, right? Okay, well, now we had programming languages, we had Fortran, and we could program some early AI algorithms. So there was a lot of excitement, and then there was a lot of hype. Hey, AI is going to solve all these problems. And then, of course, it didn't, right? Because the algorithms were not sophisticated enough and the computing power really wasn't there. And so that led to, during the 1990s and early 2000s, what has been called the AI winter, where AI became a dirty word, and you didn't want to admit to being an AI researcher for fear that you would be humiliated and made fun of, right? Because, oh, AI is we tried that, it didn't work, why are you wasting your time with that? But then something happened in 2010 that really changed that. And I would argue that we're now in this period, of course, of routine and easy AI. So let's go back in time a little bit. Just I want to give you a taste of what AI was like in the 1970s, around the time the first home computers came out. And at that time, there was an early AI called an expert system that was very popular. And this slide gives an overview. So we have a clinical question: what dose of warfarin, a blood thinner, should we give a patient? Okay, and each of us in this room probably needs a slightly different dose, depending on a whole host of different factors, right? And so you have a patient, let's say, admitted to the ICU. You need warfarin. You're worried about blood clots. You need to thin their blood. And so the question is, what dose should we give the patient? Now, a clinician has experience and can make that decision based on their experience, but the idea is to get a computer to do that. It might be faster and it might be better. So here are the components of an expert system. So let's start down here at the bottom. So you have experts, and the first thing you need to give the AI is what you know, the knowledge that the clinicians have in their head. And that's what we call an AI knowledge engineering. And that's usually represented by if-then rules, such if the age is greater than 65, then you want to give a lower dose to the patient. So you store the knowledge in a knowledge base, again, represented as rules. And then at the top, you have a clinician interacting with a patient, and the clinician gathers the facts. What do we know about the patient that might be relevant? The facts go into a database called the memory: age, sex, and other things you know about the patient, type of injury, et cetera. And then the knowledge and the facts are put together in an inference engine, which is really just a set of probability statements, a chained set of probabilities that arrive at the answer that is provided then back to the clinician. So expert systems were very popular in the 1970s. And one of the prominent figures in this space in the medical field was Ted Shortliff, shown here. Ted's a biomedical informatician. He was formerly chair of biomedical informatics at Columbia and has had a very distinguished career. But he was a PhD student at Stanford in the early 70s and created an expert system called Mycin. This is a book he wrote in 76 about Mycin, and another one in 84. And Mycin was specifically designed to prescribe antibiotics to ICU patients presenting with infection. Okay, so that was the clinical question that he was interested in. So he developed an expert system to do that, and it was actually successful. Here's a JAMA paper from 1979, where they actually put Mycin to the test. And you can see this table is ranked by performance. Mycin performed the best and beat out infectious disease faculty, fellows, and you can see the resident and the medical student are dead last, as you would expect, right? Because they have the least amount of experience and knowledge. So you would expect them to perform more poorly. But Mycin performed very well for this particular task. Unfortunately, it was never used in clinical practice, primarily because Stanford was worried about lawsuits. You could imagine if your loved one is admitted to the ICU from a car accident, is prescribed an antibiotic by Mycin, and then dies, and you find out they were prescribed the wrong antibiotic. You can imagine the lawsuits. What, you had a computer decide? Are you crazy? So they never put it into clinical practice. All right, so I said in 2010, something happened that ended the AI winter, and that was IBM Watson. And the Watson story, everybody's heard of Watson. The Watson story is really fascinating. And this is a picture of Watson. And I visited this facility in upstate New York at their research center there and got to see Watson in person. Watson was a really amazing tour de force in AI. It combined a whole bunch of computer science technology, including machine learning and natural language processing and information retrieval, et cetera. And what really convinced people that Watson was special was that it beat the Jeopardy champion in 2011. And this was, I think convincingly, right, a passing of the Turing test. Watson played Jeopardy better than the best humans on the planet, Ken Jennings included, who's now one of the hosts of Jeopardy. Now, Watson had access to about 200 million pages of knowledge, of information, about 4 terabytes. Most of that was just a dump of Wikipedia and other knowledge sources. 2,800 compute cores, so it had a supercomputer behind it, 16 terabytes of RAM, and of course, no internet connection because human players don't have access to the internet. So this was a really impressive feat of engineering and computer science, and Watson really was an impressive impressive technology. And if you're interested in the history of the Watson team, this is a little bit dry reading, but if you're interested, there's this paper in AI Magazine from 2010 from the Watson team where they kind of go through the development process and the challenges that they faced. And one of the interesting things I took away from reading this paper was Watson was not working. This team was beating their head against the wall trying to get this technology to work. And what changed, and this is relevant for the pandemic, what changed course for them was they got all their scientists in a room, a big room, and they worked together 8, 10, 12 hours a day, whatever it was, but they worked together every day instead of going off to their own offices, right? They worked together, they spent time rubbing shoulders every day, all day long, and they started solving problems, and Watson started working. I thought that was a really interesting anecdote and relevant as we think about coming back to work, right? Now, Watson, IBM, realizing they had something special after Jeopardy, they decided to, they made the decision that they were going to corner the market on AI in the healthcare industry. And they rolled out Watson. That was their first application, was to use it for healthcare. And they rolled out Watson for oncology to make decisions about, for example, prescribing chemotherapy to cancer patients. And some prominent cancer centers, MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, were among the first to sign up. Did USC ever sign up for Watson? Do you know?
I don't think so.
Probably not, but I don't remember hearing USC, or Cedars certainly didn't. I don't think UCLA did either. But a couple prominent cancer centers signed up for Watson and paid tens of millions of dollars. MD Anderson paid $60 million for Watson over probably several years. And they put it to the test, right? And they found out, long story short, they found that Watson did not work as well as their oncologists that, doing things like prescribing chemotherapy. So it was, so MD Anderson was going through some leadership issues and some financial issues, and they decided to cut their losses and they backed out of the Watson deal after spending $60 million. That's a lot of money for any institution. So anyway, Watson was considered somewhat of a failure at that point. It was not human competitive in the healthcare space, even though it was human competitive in the Jeopardy game playing space. And that led to a whole bunch of negative headlines. This is my favorite one from Gizmodo, 2017. IBM Watson is the Donald Trump of the AI industry. I think that's a little harsh. I don't think IBM deserved that, especially now that we know Donald Trump a little better. But anyway, this was a funny headline. And if you're interested in the Watson story, it's really quite interesting and it's worth reading some of these. Here's one from Stats Magazine that came out about the time all of this was unfolding, September of 2017, kind of recounting the story I just told you. This is a little more scientific treatment of the Watson story. This came out in IEEE Spectrum magazine in 2019, how IBM Watson overpromised and underdelivered on AI in healthcare. And let me just say that I'm kind of presenting the more negative glasses half empty side of Watson. There were some success stories with Watson. I want to be fair. It is an amazing technology. And I think what happened with IBM is they pushed it out too fast, right? They tried to corner the market on AI in healthcare. They probably should have started in economics or some other more tractable area. Healthcare, as we all know, is insanely hard. And so they rolled it out too fast into probably the hardest problem they could have picked. And so it was just too early. Watson probably needed another 10 years to cook before it was ready for the healthcare industry. But Watson knew they had something special and they went after it. I guess you can't blame them too much. So I don't want to be too harsh on Watson.
Wouldn't they have needed FDA approval to be used in prescribing?
I think it depends how it's used. If it's used as a device, or a treatment, then yeah, I think this is a gray area about what needs and what does not need FDA approval. And the FDA is still figuring that out. But yeah, possibly, depending on how it was being sold and sold, advertised, sold, and deployed in the clinic.
So further on that point, I mean, was it in the cancer centers, was it deployed as just sort of another bit of information for the oncologist to make the ultimate choice?
Well, let me say,
or was it really making the dose or the decision?
so my understanding is that Watson was never used to actually make clinical decisions. They were just sort of like if Watson, what would Watson have done?
And then,
Yeah, and right.
So you, as a clinician, you'd have a report and you'd have all the information that you would normally have, and then a Watson score.
Right,
or
something like that, yeah.
Okay.
And let me just say, this was really hard work on MD Anderson and on Watson's part. IBM sent a whole team of scientists down there, and they met with the oncologists and spent lots of time with them and learned and programmed Watson. I mean, it was a big deal. MD Anderson really sunk a lot of time and a lot of money into this for it not to pan out. And then the final headline I'll show you, this is from this year, early this year, January. IBM is selling off Watson Health to a private equity firm. So they got rid of it and sold it off, and it got chopped into pieces and sold off. So, so that's the end of that story, unfortunately.
Although it still exists, right? I mean,
It still exists.
somebody maybe still has hope
Yeah.
for it, or
I should have put a second slide in here. There's a new company that has now sprung up with the Watson technology. They call it something different, and I'm blanking right now. And it's been a while since I've seen what the name is, but there is a new company. It's not an intuitive name. It's a weird name company, but yeah, it still lives on, and maybe we'll make a comeback. I hope it makes a comeback. All right, so let me just stop there and see. This is sort of the background stuff. Let me just see if there are any other questions or comments, discussion. All right, well, let me move on. So why am I interested in AI? So let's imagine I brought a data set with me and gave it to all of you and said, I'll come back in 2 weeks. Your department can do anything with this data set you want, do any analyses you want, give it to every student, give it to every faculty member, give it to every postdoc, and let everybody chew on it for 2 weeks. And we'll regroup and see what people find. Every one of you would take a different path through that data set, right? Based on your training, your experience. Some of you might take a frequentist approach, a Bayesian approach. Some of you might take a machine learning approach or something else, maybe non-parametric, whatever. But each of us would take a different path. We would tinker, we would try things, and that path would be different for every one of us. And so I'm deeply interested from a computational point of view and how we as humans, from an AI point of view, how do we as humans approach the analysis of a data set? How do we make decisions about what methods to apply to a data set? How do we learn from that experience? How do we get better over time? Right? We can all remember, I see some gray hair in the room. So those of us with gray hair can remember what it was like to be a student and learning statistics or computer science for the first time. And, when I think back to where my head was when I was a PhD student, it's like, yeah, I was pretty naive about a lot of things, right? And so you get better over time and with experience and your education, et cetera. So my question is, how do we get a computer to do that, to tinker with data, choose and apply analytical algorithms and learn from experience and get better and do that automatically? So that's been a big focus of my research over the last 7 or 8 years. How do we get a computer to do that automatically, to learn, make decisions, and do analytics? And the goal, the motivation for this is to bring machine learning to the masses so that everybody, they don't have to be a USC trained biostatistician to do this. They can be a USC trained clinician or epidemiologist or biologist and can pick up machine learning, just like they can download a user-friendly stats pack and run a t-test or linear regression, right? So that's my motivation. I want to bring machine learning to the masses. I believe that we have the know-how and the technology so that everybody who wants to should be able to use this technology. Now, we can argue about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but I believe that everybody should have access. And for everybody to have access, then it needs to be as easy as pushing a button, right? You load your data set, you push a button, the computer takes over and does the machine learning for you. Boom. And that's the tool that we've created. And that's what I want to show you today. So we call our tool Aliro, and I developed this at Penn and I've moved the project to Cedars, and we're continuing to develop it at Cedars. We've rebranded it as Aliro. And so what I'm going to do is take you through the components of Aliro. So again, what we wanted to do, what we set out to do was build a system that could automatically choose and run competent analysis, machine learning analyses on a data set and get better with time. So the more data sets it experiences, the better it gets. All right, so the first thing we needed was a machine learning code base. So we needed the code to run all the different machine learning algorithms. Fortunately, there's a good open source software library out there for machine learning called scikit-learn. This is probably the most widely used machine learning library out there. It's all Python based. Very professionally developed, very mature. So that was the good news. We didn't have to build all of that. That existed. So we took that code base, and that's the base components of the system. So the next thing we needed was a controller. We needed a way. So again, the computer is going to do this, right? So the computer needs to grab a data set, grab a piece of code, put it on a server, run it, get the results, and do something with it. Okay, so that's what I call a controller. So we set out developing a controller, and we spent a few months on this. And then I ran across this GitHub project called Future Gadget Lab, which did exactly what I wanted. It gets the data, gets the code, runs it, gets the results, and sticks it in a database. So this was nice. So we didn't have to develop this, and this was all open source. And then we needed a database, and so we use a place for the machine learning results to go. This is the memory of the system, right? When we do analyses, those analyses sit on our hard drive. We publish the best analysis, and then eventually those other analyses just go away, right? You forget about them. So we want a memory so the computer can learn from all of those results and get better with experience. So we use a type of database called MongoDB, which is a type of database called a document store. And so just basically think of every result, every machine learning analysis and result as a piece of paper with all the information about the data, the machine learning, the parameter settings, all the results are all encoded in what's called JSON format. So this is just a markup language like what's shown here. And then a MongoDB database just makes it really easy to store those results and search for them. So this is not a relational database, but a document store. You're just putting those pieces in there. They're indexed based on keywords. You can easily search them. And MongoDB even has graph capability now, so you can link the documents based on shared keywords. But anyway, this is a really easy database to use. It makes it easy to get things in, get things out. It was perfect for our system.
So each sheet in this database is a summary of an analysis.
Yeah.
Not actual data.
No, it's the results.
The meta file.
What's the area under the ROC curve? What are the details of the machine learning analysis, the details of the data, but not the raw data.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I've told you thus far is we used an open source machine learning library. We used an open source controller, and we used an open source database solution. So at this point, it's just engineering, getting all those things to talk to each other. Now we needed the guts of it, the AI, and that we developed ourselves. So this is kind of our secret sauce. So we needed the AI algorithm, and we tried a bunch of different things. But what we settled on was basically a type of recommender system, like when you go shopping on Amazon, right? It recommends things to you. This is an actual screenshot of my Amazon page about a year ago after I moved to LA. And you can see it's like, oh, I was buying stuff for cooking and, you know, getting my kitchen set up and getting my home office set up. And so Amazon knew the kinds of things that I was shopping for, and it was recommending new things that I might be interested in.
Bell bottom pants.
Yeah.
1977 was a good year.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to 77.
It knows me, right? Amazon knows me. And I did buy a Brita, so they knew I needed Brita filters.
But in Studio City, do you need that snow blue? I need to get one, so.
All right, so what we do is we take that database of machine learning results and we represent it something like this, kind of a data matrix, where every row is a different machine learning result. We have some performance metric like the area under the ROC curve. And then we have some indicator variables for things like, okay, what machine learning method did we use? What parameter setting did we use? And then we have things called meta features. We have about 100 different meta features, and these are the characteristics of the data. What's the distribution of the data? How many variables are there? You know, what's the how much missing data is there? That kind of stuff. And so we have 100 different meta features that we measure. Turns out those aren't as important as I thought they would be, but we capture that. And so this is the data matrix that we then use to build the recommender system, right? So you can imagine in your head as a statistician all the things you would do to this data set to develop a model that would then say, okay, here for a new data set, based on my experience represented in this table, here's the next analysis you should run on this data set. So that's the recommender piece of this. It's looking at all this data and saying, okay, what's the next best analysis to run on this data set? And then it can do that automatically. So it turns out we ended up using singular value decomposition, and I'll show you some results in a few minutes, some benchmarking results on what that looks like. All right, the last thing we needed was a way for the human. Again, we want this to be accessible to everybody, so it has to have a simple interface. And this is the interface we developed, and this is work done when I was at Penn by a very talented programmer named Sharon Cardarone, who developed this interface, and she did a lovely job. And she did such a great job that she was stolen away from us by the New York Times, and is now doing this kind of stuff for New York Times. And so when you log into Aliro, this is what you see. So every square here is a different data set that you have loaded, and to load the data set, you just load a CSV file. So it's very simple file format. You just load that, it shows up here. And then it gives a summary of the best result found thus far. Here's the accuracy of the classifier based on cross-validation. It shows you what the method was. And this is the number of results that are in the database for that particular data set. Now, at this point, all you do is load a data set, a CSV file, and all you have to do machine learning is push this button. That turns the AI on. The AI takes over. The recommender system takes over, and it starts launching machine learning analyses, what it thinks are the best machine learning analyses, automatically on your data set. And then those results go in the database. So it's learning from itself. Okay. So it's that easy. A 2-year-old, you load this on an iPad, put it in front of a 2-year-old. Eventually they're going to push this button and do machine learning. So I like to say a 2-year-old can do machine learning with this tool. And that's my goal, to bring this to the masses so that you don't have to be a biostatistician or computer scientist to do machine learning. You can be anybody, regardless of your training and expertise. Okay, now if you want to do a manual analysis, you push the blue button, and that brings you to this page, and we have some preset commonly used machine learning methods like gradient boosting classifiers, random forest, logistic regression, etc. You click on a method, it presents the parameters, you hit the parameters, hit go. It's that easy to do machine learning. No coding involved. You just push a few buttons and you're doing a manual machine learning analysis. And again, when the human user does a machine learning analysis, that result goes in the database. So the AI is learning from itself, but it's also learning from your interactive manual analysis.
But is this a machine learning, or is that just running a single analysis that you specify?
Yeah, this would run a single machine learning analysis that you specify, right? You're picking the method, you're picking the parameters, you hit go, it just runs that one analysis.
Okay.
Right, now when it's done, you get a table that looks like this of results. So these are all the results for this particular data set. You can sort them by accuracy from best to worst. It shows you the method, and then you can click on the algorithm up there, and there's another page I'm not going to show you where it'll show a more detailed set of results with all the different parameter settings. So you can kind of scan through and see all the detailed results. But here, from this button, you can do a couple different things. You can download the model, the Python, and the model itself, or you can download the Python code. So Aliro not only does the machine learning for you, but it writes the Python code for you, right? So if you did this random forest analysis up here by hand, push a button, downloads the Python code that will reproduce that exact analysis for your data set, so that you can then take that code, scrutinize it, modify it, do whatever you want with it. So that's a really nice feature of it. All right, now if you click on one of these rows, one of these results, that brings you to this dashboard. We have a nice dashboard that summarizes the performance metrics, the accuracy, the variant of the ROC curve. We give the ROC curve with a 95% confidence interval, confusion matrix, and we provide a little bit of interpretation. We provide what are called Shapley values, which are popular in machine learning for interpreting, and we also provide permutation feature importance scores, where we randomize one of the features, rerun the machine learning analysis, look at the change in accuracy, and that's a measure of how important that feature is. Okay, so here's the whole system. We have a code base, we have a controller, we have a database. All this happens automatically. We have a recommender system that learns from experience. That's why we call it AI, because it's learning from experience. We have a user-friendly interface, so anybody, including David, can do this. So let me show you some results. So this is a paper that we published, I think 2 years ago. This is work done by my postdoc, Bill LaCava, who's now an assistant professor at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard. And so he really put this to the test. We built this system, but then we still had this question, is it really learning? Is it really doing anything, right? So he put it to the test. And what we did was we presented the AI with hundreds of data sets in random orderings over and over and over again. And so the idea was, okay, Aliro runs, let's say, 10 analyses on a data set and learns, and then it's presented with a new data set, and it runs again, a new data set runs again. And so over time, it should get better and better with it, because its experience is getting better. And we presented with different orderings, and that's what the confidence intervals are. And this is comparing different recommender systems. So we use things like k-nearest neighbors and clustering, and then the SVD that I mentioned, which is this purple down here. But what I want to point to first is the yellow line and the blue line up here at the top. The yellow and blue. The blue is if you just pick randomly. If you just pick machine learning algorithms randomly, how does the system do? So there's absolutely zero learning other than by chance, right? And you can see it's flat across, so it doesn't gain any experience. And you can kind of, that's the baseline. Yellow is if we average, if we take that table of results and we just kind of average and say, on average, what is the best algorithm to run and the best parameter setting? You can see average doesn't really do very well at all. But the singular value decomposition performed pretty well. And after just about 50 data sets, it's already performing quite well. And after about 200 data sets, performing very well. And we did a very thorough search of all the parameter settings, all the methods for these data sets. So we know what the right answers are. And that's what this is being compared to. Okay, so this convinced us that first, it's learning. It's doing what we thought it would do. And secondly, the singular value decomposition was the best approach to use. Now, one of the questions I would commonly get is, okay, that's great, but how does this compare to the best other automated machine learning methods out there? And let me just say that we were one of the first. We developed one of the very first. We developed one before this that was among the very first automated machine learning algorithms in the world. One of the other first ones was AutoSclearn, which is very commonly used. And so and HyperOpt is another one in black. And so we applied Blue as our algorithm, what we used to call Pen AI. And you can see that it's performing on par with autosclerin. So we did not set out to develop the most powerful automated method for machine learning. We set out to develop the most user-friendly. But in doing so, we actually created one that was competitive with the best automated machine learning methods out there. So that was really nice to be able to say. All right, so let me show you a real data example where this is applied. So we found this paper, my postdoc, Bill, found this paper from 2019 in Scientific Reports. We wanted ideally like a deep learning type analysis to compare to, and we wanted a large sample size, so we knew we had good data quality and all that kind of thing. So we found this paper, and this paper worked with a data set from Boston that's available through a data use agreement called MIMIC, which is a ICU-based data set. So there are 60,000 patients in this data set with electronic health record data from the ICU. So it's a good, decent sample size. And in this paper, so it's ICU data. So there's some time series here, right? So they're following patients, they're tracking their oxygen levels, their blood pressure, their heart rate, et cetera. And one of the big problems in the ICU is sepsis or septic shock. And so the authors of this paper developed a type of deep learning algorithm called a long short-term memory neural network, which is a type of deep learning ideal for time series data. And they were predicting septic shock using these time series measures, and presented their results and claimed to have good performance, which they did. And so we thought this would be a good test case. So what we did was we ran Penn AI, shown in this table up here. I think it was 10 times. And then we had an undergraduate in the lab that knew nothing about machine learning, and we had her use Aliro to just pick some methods, and she didn't really know what she was doing. And that's the user here. So that's the naive undergraduate, and she did 5 analyses. So the best result was this selected automatically by Aliro, this gradient boosting, here are the parameter settings. And then on bifold cross-validation, had an area under the ROC curve of about 0.9. And on a holdout data set that we use for testing and validation, it had a predictive or an AUC of 0.85. And here is the LSTM on that holdout data set had an AUC of 0.86. So we're right there within the margin of error with what the deep learning algorithm did. And then just for comparison, this is what a standard attuned logistic regression with an L2 penalty would do, 0.84 and then 0.81 on the holdout data set, just as a baseline for logistic regression. So Aliro found a competitive answer automatically, and it did so very efficiently. So if you look at the time here, total time for everybody, including the undergraduate, was about maybe an hour of total time. And the deep learning algorithm took 30 hours on this data set to generate its answer. And so Aliro did this completely automatically, developed what I would call a human competitive result. All right, so Aliro's available. It's on our GitHub, and super easy to use. It's a little tricky to install because it's actually built, if you know what Docker is, containers, it's built on a couple Docker containers. You have to have Docker on your computer. You can load this up. If you have Docker on your laptop, you can load this up and install it if you kind of know what you're doing. Ideally, this would be put on your own server. We don't have a central server. We have a model where you put this on your own server, behind your own firewall, work with your own data. We don't want your data, so we don't do this centrally. So you download it, install it, put it on your server, and you can use it. You just interact with it through a web browser.
But so the question of interest is prediction, right? For this, given what the examples you've given, sort of, and the features are all exchangeable for that, right? They would be features. GWAS could be an example, gene expression or something like that. So what's the plan for expansion? Or I mean, that's the case right now, right? It's sort of you have an outcome, it's a general regression type of framework, right? And there's some sort of selection within that.
Right. Yeah, if you were to use regression or logistic
You know,
regression, then you could use this. Yeah.
Yeah, as a general
Right.
framework. I guess like. So that the data coming in has to be prepped. So good data coming in is a requirement for this to work.
Yeah.
And so. I guess where's your thoughts on AI there? In that realm?
Yeah.
Maybe what my question is.
So I've actually, we have a lot of experience now doing these automated methods. And actually, I'll have to come back and tell you some other time about, this would be of interest to the geneticists in your department. We've taken this idea of automation and we've created a software package we're about to release, and we just submitted a paper on called AutoQTL for automated quantitative trait locus analysis. So we've taken this general idea and we're starting to now think about, okay, how do we develop automated methods for very specific tasks like QTL analysis? And if you think about all the decisions you need to make about QTLs, right? You think about allele frequency, you think about LD, you think about biochemical pathways, you think about what regression method are you going to use for this, and those guys. So there are a lot of decisions that you make as a geneticist, as a statistical geneticist, that are very specific to that problem, right? That aren't going to translate to ICU data.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is created a tool that can automatically do QTL analysis. It automatically can select SNPs based on allele frequency. It can automatically pick the right regression method and tune the parameters, where we also include some like random forest space regression and those kinds of things. And we applied that to some QTL data and showed that when there are additive effects, it finds a linear model. When there are non-additive effects, it finds a non-additive model. And it does so automatically without human input, which is really nice. So that's one direction we're headed.
Yeah.
Is thinking about, okay, how do we tailor this automation to specific problem?
And the input there would be, CIDR genotype data set and an outcome type of thing.
Exactly.
And go for it. Okay.
Right. So that's where we're headed with that. I have a new big grant focused on Alzheimer's, automated machine developing these methods for Alzheimer's, looking at multimodal data. And one of the big things we're working on right now is how do we use expert biological knowledge? So we built a knowledge base. It's alzkb.ai. It's an Alzheimer knowledge base. We integrate 20 different sources of knowledge about genes and pathways and drugs and diseases and symptoms, et cetera, using a biomedical ontology. It all goes into a graph database. So we have all the knowledge networked and graphed, and with all the relationships, the semantic relationships. And so the big question I'm focusing on right now, this is really a major focus of my research program the next few years, is how do we get these automated machine learning methods to use that, to be aware of that knowledge, just like you're aware of knowledge, right? And how do you get an algorithm to know about that knowledge and use it to guide variable selection, model interpretation, and do all those things automatically? That's what I'm really interested in right now. All right, let me just give you a couple closing thoughts. One of the things we're doing is, because this is so easy to use, we think this will be very valuable for educational purposes. So we're creating an education version of this that for the Raspberry Pi. This is the Raspberry Pi 400 computer, which costs $100. It's a whole computer. It's a real computer. It comes in a keyboard. You just plug it in and go. And all you do is download from our webpage, automatically builds an SD card image. You just plug that in, turn it on, and a Lero pops up, and you're doing machine learning. It's that easy. So we think this will be very useful for students. So we're going to roll this out in the coming months for students. One of the things I'm really interested in, this is a piece. This was kind of a fun piece. An opinion piece that I published a few years ago, thinking about imagining that these automated AIs just live in the cloud and they're just always working with your data, right? You give it all your data and it's just there. It's constantly learning and trying things. And maybe once a week it sends you an email and says, here's what I found so far. What do you think? And you give it some feedback and it just goes on its merry way. And so I imagine this job ad. I wrote this pretend job ad, wanted a human assistant to the AI the AI exists in the cloud and just is there automatically. And the human is an assistant to the AI, right? Getting results and interacting with the AI. So that was kind of a fun thought. And I think we're very close to this idea of persistent AI. Just imagine a persistent postdoc level scientist in your lab that's always there, always analyzing data. Instead, you would have an AI do that. This is a piece I published in Scientific American last year on the question medical AI can't answer. And the problem with every AI is that you can't ask why. Why is Aliro telling me this is the best solution for this data set? Why is a deep learning algorithm telling me this is the right answer? And if you're a clinician or an epidemiologist, you want to know why, right? You want to understand, why is it telling me this? What does it mean? Why is it important? And we can't ask our AI this. Interestingly, the expert systems that I told you about from the 70s, they can do that because they can backtrack through the probability statements and say, okay, this is why, because of this and this and this. And but modern AI can't tell you why. And this is a big problem that needs to be solved. I'll skip this. I wrote this piece on the human side of AI, and I even though I've talked about automated machine learning, I do think humans very much need to be in the loop, and that humans are still an important part of the process. And that's why I think one of the reasons I think expert knowledge is so important. All right, I'll stop there. I want to thank the team at Penn that did all the initial development. Sharon developed the interface. Heather Williams was my lead software engineer that really made this work. Bill was the postdoc that did the evaluation and developed the recommender system. And then my current team at Cedars, Nick Matsumoto, who used to work here at USC. I don't know if any of you know Nick. He was in the Convergent Science Center. Anyway, he came over to work with us. So we've got a great team to push this forward. I've got two NIH grants really focused on developing automated machine learning methods. And there's my email, GitHub, my webpage. So again, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And we're located in West Hollywood at the Pacific Design Center. This is what Cedars is calling the North Campus. We don't own this building, but we are renting massive amounts of space in this building. It's very much underutilized. We have a whole floor of the blue building where we're putting a lot of lab space for omics. And we're on the 5th floor of the green building. That's where my department is. It's a great location, right near Santa Monica and San Vicente. So I'll stop there and take any more questions.
Any questions from people in the?
Just going back to the subject data you showed, so the input then that's provided is patient had septic shock or didn't.
Right.
A whole bunch of variables, right?
Right. So there were 60,000 ICU patients. Some of them had septic shock. That was the binary endpoint that we were predicting.
Yeah.
And then we had all these other measures, blood pressure, oxygen, other things, age, sex, et cetera, that you would have in the electronic health record.
And then in terms of, finding the best model, is it considering things like model assumptions and, the kinds of things that you do as you're building up a good model, making sure that your model assumptions are met and outliers, all that kind of thing. So,
yeah, it's a good question. We do provide it like I said, the meta features of the data, so it knows something about the data and the distribution of the data, all those kind of the types of variables, all those kinds of things. But you're right, it doesn't. What we typically think of in statistics is testing model assumptions, and it doesn't know anything about that. It's purely learning based on performance, right, and choosing better and better models on a data set, doing cross validation and taking into consideration things like generalizability of the model.
Yeah.
But machine learning in general doesn't think about model assumptions. It's an interesting question. I should think about that some more. Whether it's a decision tree or a random forest or logistic regression, most people don't care, right?
Just hit it with big sample sizes.
No,
I'm thinking, even something as simple as data collection errors. You've got somebody who's a BMI was reported as 300 instead of 30. Does that get caught, or does that just go in and it's part of the slot?
Well, I think it gets to the question that David asked earlier, and we're assuming at this point that you're providing it good data and that you've already done all that data cleaning, right? It knows nothing about data cleaning. But to further answer David's question, I have thought about automating data cleaning. And I've got an idea sketched out, and hope to be able to find some time to write an R1 in the next year or two on that. Because I think now that we have all this experience, I think we can take on problems like that, right? You could write an algorithm that knows how to do the things a master's level statistician would do with a data set, right? Thinking about outliers, thinking about missing data and how to deal with that, and extreme values, et cetera. So I think if we can crack that nut, that would be a huge time savings, right? You can imagine a computer kind of doing a first round data cleaning, and then maybe your master's level statistician analyst does the the visualization just to kind of gut check and make sure it looks okay and do some fine tuning maybe, but that would save a huge amount of time. So it's something I'm thinking about, but have not touched yet. But I think your questions are really good, important.
How do you think AI would take on the short wide problems? So, we have all these data sets that involve hundreds or, maybe a couple of thousand observations, but hundreds of thousands or millions of features, and typically it seems like AI is very observation hungry. So yeah, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, so for instance, in a clinical trial, you might have a very small number of patients, and then if it's a pharmaceutical company, they have a lot of money, right? They can measure all kinds of things. So they would have tons of data on a very small number of observations.
Yeah, it's a good question. I reviewed a grant this week. These were pilot grants, but somebody was proposing to do machine learning on 30 subjects, right? 15 in each group. Like, no, this is not going to work. So yeah, it's a big problem. I think the only way you can do it is if you get the number of variables, the number of features down less than the sample size, right? That's the only way you can make it work. So you got to do some kind of variable selection a priori based on your biological knowledge, go back, if you have a GWAS, pick the top GWAS hits and look at those genes, right? Instead of looking at the whole genome, or if you have a pathway, or, go back to doing candidate pathway or candidate gene type studies. I think that's all you can do, right? So you got to use your biological knowledge, your clinical knowledge to do variable selection, and then before you do the machine learning. That has its own issues, of course, but I don't know how else to handle that, because you can't put 1 million features into a machine learning algorithm with 100 sample size of 100. It's a recipe for disaster. It's not going to work.
Is that like a parameter sample size, something that your algorithms learn? Like I would assume it's part of the metadata of those files.
Yeah, it has the metadata has the sample
Right,
size.
at a sample size, and so part of its learning process is saying
It could.
this algorithm works well when the sample's large or small.
Theoretically,
Why
it
it's
could learn
learning,
that.
right?
I don't know if it is learning that, but theoretically it could learn that. Like I said, we've done some studies looking at the metadata, and it doesn't seem to be that useful. Maybe we've parameterized it wrong, or I don't know, but
It could be, I mean, in this situation, right, it's, again, going back, I mean, the algorithms that you have are a general class of prediction algorithms that are all, again, the features are exchangeable, they can be treated as the same, put them in and just see how well it predicts. Versus, different kinds of, we have EMR, and then you have, RNA expression and GWAS, and those are all different, and within those classes, they're different, and maybe that's what it learns, is it, in terms of metadata on the features that might be better to include or something in a bigger type of knowledge base guided thing.
yeah, but to further answer your question, I don't do that. I don't do those kinds of studies. It's just the results are meaningless, I think.
What about longitudinal data? Is it just cross-sectional, right?
You would have to, so what we did in the example I showed you, the ICU data, which had longitudinal data.
Oh, okay.
So what we did was provided summary statistics on the longitudinal data, the min, the max, the mean, the median, the autocorrelation function, so we had some time series statistics in there. like the first and second lag autocorrelation. So we calculated summary statistics and then provided that to the AI. So that's one way to deal with that if you have longitudinal data. But there's no reason why you couldn't use this to do time series prediction, for example, right? So you just set up your tabular data with the different lags, right, of the time series, and then you have your endpoint you're trying to, or your future measurement that you're trying to predict. So you could do that. It's just, you just have to structure the data so it makes sense to the algorithm.
Okay.
But
I guess I go
and-
back to like
Yeah.
the kind of cleaning or the setup of the data.
Inherently, it knows nothing about whether it's time series
Yeah.
or not time series.
Yeah.
But there's no reason, I mean, it's open source, so there's no reason why you couldn't take this and modify it to be more of a longitudinal data analysis type algorithm.
Is there, you showed the really nice, user interface for running models on data sets. Is there a similarly easy way if somebody wants to then do prediction on new data? Because I think a lot of people that want to do machine learning and be interested in predicting future outcomes, seeing how that.
Well, one way to do that is to, like I said, you can download the code, right? And download the model, and then you can apply that model to a new data set sort of outside the frameworks. You could just do that on, on your own computer. Before I left Penn, that was on our list of things to do, is to allow a user to load a new data set and do prediction within the tool, but we didn't get to that, and the move kind of got in the way of that, but hopefully we'll get back to that sometime soon. But there's no reason why you couldn't, because you have access to the model, you can run it outside the algorithm.
What's the name? Where does the name come from?
Aliro.
Yeah.
Aliro is Esperanto for accessible or access. So that's why because we wanted, we wanted something that was descriptive of what we think the algorithm is, that it makes machine learning accessible.
Any questions online, or has everybody?
Yeah, I guess I have a question. Just curious, like, is it possible for users to customize the models of machine learning methods within the framework of Aliro? So, for example, if people are interested in some methods outside the scikit-learn, they can add those methods into the Aliro framework and customize the UI by their research interest or question.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Certainly you can turn on and off anything in scikit-learn that you want with a little bit of coding. We don't make it easy to do that, but the source code's there. I think you could, with a little bit of direction, customize what algorithms are there. Bringing in something new would require you to write some new code. So again, I think it would be a great feature, but we don't have an easy way to do that at the moment.
Got it. Thank you.
That's an interesting, yeah, because you could have like a model object that could be any model, that as long as it returns what you need.
So this is a mundane question, but how do you program the front end, and is that for all laptops?
It's all JavaScript, HTML5. So yeah, it'll run on any platform easily. Yeah, it's just a web browser. It's just a web browser. Yeah, so it'll run on Mac or Windows or Linux easily. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And just to remind everybody, we will be meeting outside, the usual after. Grab your lunch, if you haven't eaten it already, and we can hang out and continue the discussion up there. So thank you very much.
Sure.
So, my, I was on my here. I'll show you. That's my last few years.
Right.